Axie is here with the papers as well, and perhaps not surprisingly, one story really dominating papers, particularly in the UK, of course. This is the publication of the Chilcot Report, Axie, into Britain's part in the invasion of Iraq back in 2003.
The Sun today has one of my favourite headlines, Weapons of Mass Deception, a play, of course, on the weapons of mass destruction that Tony Blair insisted were the real reason that Britain joined the USA in its invasion and, of course, subsequent occupation of Iraq. Except those WMDs, as they came to be known, turned out not to exist, of course, and the long-awaited Chilcot Report has found that, quote, the judgments about the severity of the threat posed by Iraq's WMDs were presented with a certainty that was not justified, although it is worth mentioning here that the Sun was in fact an outspoken supporter of the Iraq War at the time.
Now, the Times has picked up on a very different but equally damning detail from this report.
Under the headline, Blair's Private War, the Times has used a much circulated photo of a rather downcast-looking Tony Blair, something of a defeated man there. Just above him, the words, I will be with you, whatever. Now, these are the words addressed by Blair to then US President George W. Bush, of course. The report has seized on this declaration of support as part of a body of evidence that the UK chose to join in the invasion before all other peaceful options for disarmament had been exhausted.
Now, criticism of Blair has been somewhat unanimous, as Axie says there, but there's rather an original take on Blair's motivations. This is on the Spectator's blog.
So much of what's being written today about Blair paints him as a deceptive warmonger who deliberately misled the public. But this piece insists that he's not a liar, he's a genuine believer. Not that that makes him any less to blame. The author says that Blair's desire to spread values of freedom, of democracy and tolerance, essentially to make the world a better, freer place, is in fact what made him so dangerous. It was his boyish naivety in thinking that unsettling a despot is all it takes for freedom and security to flourish. And that was his ultimate undoing.
And what about reaction in Iraq then?
There's a very sobering piece in The Guardian today from the paper's correspondent in Baghdad, where, of course, some 250 people were killed when a huge blast ripped through a shopping district on Sunday. The piece says that most Baghdad residents, still reeling from one of the worst atrocities in post-war Iraq, were oblivious to the publication of the Chilcot Report. This article says it would merely tell them what they already knew, that the war and its aftermath were both grave mistakes. There's also a good and rather cynical piece in the Saudi paper Ashaq al-Awsat. It questions the timing of the publication of the Chilcot Report. It says that with the UK in post-Brexit crisis mode and with the Muslim world having just embarked on Eid celebrations to mark the end of Ramadan, global attention is somewhat diverted from Chilcot's findings. The paper doesn't expect much to come of the revelations.
You've been looking at the US papers as well, haven't you?
There's a piece in the New York Times today that describes the report as a searing moment of public accountability for Blair, whose legacy has been defined in Britain almost entirely negatively for his decision to go into Iraq with the US. The article goes on to analyse the repercussions of the so-called special relationship, namely that Parliament in Britain has ever since been very reluctant to authorise further military action alongside Washington. Think about the UK's reluctance, for example, to join America's bombing campaign in Syria.
Now, another story that's been making global headlines. This is the news that the Paralympic athlete Oscar Pistorius has been sentenced to 6 years in prison for killing his girlfriend, Reva Steenkamp.
The Wall Street Journal says that the 3-year legal saga has laid bare South Africa's struggles with race and domestic violence, reminding readers that Pistorius, who was initially convicted of culpable homicide of manslaughter, could have been handed a minimum sentence for 15 years for murder. South African tabloid paper News 24 goes one step further in its condemnation of what it sees as an extraordinarily lenient sentence. Let me just read you a little bit of that. It starts off this article. Want to murder your girlfriend but don't have the 15 years to spend in a maximum security prison? Want to destroy a family but don't have the stomach to pay the price? Well, the South African court system is the place for you.
Yeah, summed up. Now, another bit of controversy, the one we were talking about earlier, Marvel Comics announcing that Iron Man will soon be a young black female teenager.
Indeed, they have. But of course, as you were mentioning earlier, it's not quite that simple. While many have been celebrating what they see as a victory for racial and gender diversity, others aren't so impressed. As the Washington Post puts it, if you're going to bring in a new, young black character and put a famous superhero mantle on her shoulders, the least you can do is give her an authentic black female voice. Brian Michael Bendis, the series writer, is, no surprises here, a middle-aged white man.
Typical, isn't it? OK, thank you very much. Haxie with the papers there. Iron Man becoming Iron Maiden, as one of the tweets said the other day. Thanks to Haxie, thanks to Stephen. A lot more news